It's on the governors when to reopen the economy. Plus, Trump is freezing World Health Organization funding. Those checks that are coming to you this week have a name on them. We'll tell you who it is. Also, what has been the president's scariest day? Not so far, but of his life. He tells us that. Is testing really the answer we've been led to believe? And limousine liberals have a message for the peasants coming up.
The plans to reopen the country are close to being finalized, and we will soon be sharing details and new guidelines with everybody. I will be speaking to all 50 governors very shortly, and I will then be authorizing each individual governor of each individual state to implement a reopening and a very powerful reopening plan of their state at a time and in a manner as most appropriate. The day will be very close because certain states, as you know, are in much different condition and in a much different place than other states. It's going to be very, very close, maybe even before the date of May 1st.
Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. President telling us how it's going to be. I'm pretty sure that's a Third Eye Blind song. I've been listening to a lot of 90s music these days so that I can go back to a happy place. God, I miss the 90s. That was the last time it felt like all the good guys were winning. Fall of the Soviet Union. Cell phones existed but weren't ubiquitous. No Twitter. No Facebook, no social media. Food was still good, not as good as it is now, but it was still good. But anyway, Trump was telling us all how it's going to be going forward for the governors, who's going to be opening up the country, who's going to be left in charge of each individual state. And turns out it's exactly what, constitutionally speaking, the president should be doing. So we had all this conversation, all this discussion yesterday about how the president is, the left is saying the president's a tyrant now. It's not up to him. He doesn't have unlimited authority. And some of us were saying, stop the hyperventilating. We all know what Trump was saying. We all know that, the journalists poked him a little bit. And when you poke Trump, you poke the bear, you see what happens. So we started saying things like my authority is absolute and everything else. But we all knew that was just Trump getting his, strutting his stuff a little bit, getting his back up against the wall and deciding that he was going to throw down. The guy's under a lot of stress. He's under a lot of pressure. When push comes to shove, well, the Trumpster shoves very hard. But beyond that, he is letting the governors make the choice for the state. That's the way that they should be. It is completely within the constitutional framework. It is completely what we have been hoping the president would do. And here's the problem for the journos, who you'd like to think are first and foremost invested in making sure the American people have the best information possible and that we all get through this together. But no, I think for many of them, they believe their primary mission is to make sure that Donald Trump suffers the consequences for this pandemic response and therefore loses the election coming up this fall. So they don't know what to do with this now because Trump is clearly doing the right thing by letting the governors make these determinations. And there's going to be a whole series of calculations. I don't just mean looking at the numbers, but political calculations that take place here too. The left, as I've been telling you, has rediscovered federalism. Oh, that's right. States have plenary powers that if it's not an enumerated power in the Constitution, it is left to the states, right? The 10th Amendment effectively just tells us what we already should know from the Constitution, but it's kind of like a, hey, just so you guys are very clear on this one. As long as the states are not violating the Constitution or federal law, and as long as it's not a power given to the federal government by all the states, it is a state power. We are seeing once again that states do have rights, authorities, purviews, and also what state you live in could mean a whole lot, not just for your business, but also for the health and safety of you and the population around you. Maybe everyone's going to feel a little bit differently going forward, voting for, lunatic liberals in some of these very, very blue states. But perhaps that's too hopeful a position. Some people never seem to learn. But we do know that we're heading toward this phased reopening. So that's a good thing. We also know that there are some states that have already shown that they have very low numbers of infected and even some very populous areas. I mean, Los Angeles is a very populous but not densely populated part of the country, and they have a fraction of the cases that we have in New York City. People being very close together in confined spaces, from everything we've seen so far, is among the very biggest risk factors for the spread, certainly, of the disease, not necessarily looking at the specific mortality, although spread and mortality are certainly tied together. But Los Angeles, look, there are people that are have been mingling in the past, at least, at cafes and gyms and stores, and so there's clearly the risk, and there has been disease spread in the Los Angeles area. But all you have to do is compare New York to L.A., and you realize that some places have a bigger problem with this than others. And there's no rational explanation right now for why we should think that L.A., given that people are taking basic mitigation measures and are doing what they can, that L.A. will be as bad as New York. And, God forbid, speaking here as a New Yorker, from the center of Manhattan, surrounded by the tallest buildings. I'm not just in New York. I'm probably in the most during the work week and under normal times. Right now, it feels like a ghost town because all the office buildings are empty. But I may be in the most densely populated area. 1 square mile area of the most densely populated city in the United States. And I'm here to say, along with many others, that we want to make sure that there are lessons learned from what we are suffering through here so that other places don't have to suffer through it. And the lesson that I'm taking from it so far, and this is after talking to as many doctors as I possibly can, and I read about this all day now. This is really, it is almost an obsession, and I think that a lot of us feel the same way. It's hard to get your mind off of it. That's why I'm such a proponent of other shows that don't deal, don't watch Outbreak, don't watch 28 Days Later, get your mind off these things. Now's a great time to start Game of Thrones, the books or the series if you haven't, right? You want to get your mind into a totally different world sometimes, because otherwise you find yourself just ruminating, just going through this all the time. But I'm as neck deep in the newest information about this as possible here in New York and across the country. And it just doesn't seem to be the case. And if I'm wrong, I'll come on the show and I'll admit it doesn't seem to be the case that other states are going to have anywhere near the problem that New York City has had. And that seems pretty clear at this point. Detroit is bad, but Detroit's a very densely populated city. They've had a major outbreak. But I'm saying in terms of the scale of what we've seen here in New York, that does not seem that it's going to be replicated elsewhere. And so there are other states that are at lower risk. There are other states that have lower risk factors for the massive spread of this disease than, say, New York does. And that was part of why I find it troubling that North Carolina shut down that protest yesterday and said that it was not considered an essential activity, even though the protesters were maintaining social distancing. North Carolina is not going to have anywhere near the problem that New York has. And South Dakota, there's a trend that you're seeing emerge where places, when things don't add up to what the lockdown consensus crew, when anyone has a data point that does not fit into their model, and never mind the fact that the overall models, the IHME models, have been just incredibly wrong. Wrong to the point now where you'd say, are they just guessing? I can guess too. Yes, people are dying. More people will die. It's terrible. What's the number? I can guess a number. It seems like the Washington University IHME models paid for by the Gates Foundation, that they are so off that now people are just forgetting that they were even used to justify the massive lockdown. And I just find that concerning. I find that troubling. I insist on asking questions here, even if some people don't agree, don't want to hear the questions. We still have to push. And that's why I think it's very interesting in South Dakota, for example, Governor Kristi Noem just earlier today, this morning, shared the following, quote, "We trusted South Dakotans to exercise personal responsibility to keep themselves and their loved ones healthy. They've stepped up to the challenge. But some folks in the national press are improperly conflating that decision with the situation at Smithfield. Now, Smithfield is a meat processing plant, and they've had an outbreak there. So everyone says, see, South Dakota, you only had, whatever it was, in the hundreds of cases total and very, very few deaths. But now you've had, 3-digit level case breakout in this one plant. See, South Dakota, you were wrong." That's what the national press is saying. Well, the governor claps back at them, so to speak, and says, hold on a second. Let's look at what's really going on here. Quote, "Let's be perfectly clear. A shelter-in-place order would not have prevented Smithfield from happening. They are a critical infrastructure business. They are part of the nation's food supply chain and contribute to South Dakota's role feeding the country and the world. We've been in frequent communication with Vice President Pence, Secretary Sonny, and the CEO of Smithfield." That's Secretary Sonny Perdue. "We're working together on that's the USDA, by the way, USDA Secretary. Working together on a plan to get the plant open as soon as it's safe. A CDC team arrives today to help us assess the situation on the ground. Stay strong, South Dakota. Together, we will get through this." Okay, South Dakota does not need a lockdown because a plant that has hundreds of people working in it that must stay open, which means hundreds of people are supposed to keep working no matter what, were exposed to the virus. This virus is super contagious in closed quarters over a period of time. We already know that. But let's learn the proper lessons here. South Dakota as a state is not at risk for northern Italy or New York City or Detroit-style breakouts. And to pretend otherwise is counterproductive. And to look at one case of one breakout in a vacuum and act like that's indicative of what would happen in the rest of the country unless we continue the lockdown. Continue the lockdown for how long? And a lockdown in South Dakota at this point is not justified by the numbers. Lockdown is different from mitigation measures and common sense. There is no, this is one of the more frustrating parts of this. There is no argument for no masks, no gloves, cough in people's faces. If you're sick, go to work. Nobody is saying that. Nobody. But if you're a healthy 35-year-old, you can't open your store, wear a mask, and sell goods to people. If you're wanting to go buy seeds in a store where you're already present, you can't because that's considered non-essential. Non-essential is now something that's just made up by governors and by members of various administrative bodies deciding what you can and can't buy in a store where you're already present. Are they trying to destroy the economy even more than it's already being destroyed? Right? Let's learn the appropriate lessons and take appropriate action. We all want the same things here, the best for the American people. Well, basically all of us want the same thing. Some people just want Trump to lose, but they're psychopaths. I can't really account for them. Unfortunately, there are a lot of them, and a good number of them tend to work in the national press. But let's learn the appropriate lessons, and let's not allow people to fearmonger and act like there is a lockdown is a temporary extreme measure. A lockdown is not a solution. It is not a cure, and it is not sustainable. We need to start talking about this in the proper context. That's where we are from here going forward.
The scariest day of my life was about a month ago when, after a long day of meetings, my team told me that we were going to be needing 130,000 ventilators, that we were short hundreds of thousands of ventilators. This is the system we inherited.
The system that he inherited. They don't want to talk about this, but the Obama administration did, in fact, have to use, because of the H1N1 pandemic, which very few people, I think, even remember. It just received a very different kind of coverage. And look, it's not as severe as COVID-19, to be sure. But I mean, people don't even. I mean, you're going to remember this for the rest of your life. We're all going to remember this forever. People don't even remember H1N1. It wasn't that long ago. The president's saying that we did not have the strategic stockpile replenished. And you would think that an administration beforehand that had gone through something that could have turned into a massive pandemic, it was certainly an epidemic in certain areas, that the administration before would replenish. And guess what? Now they're claiming that they did. So we're going to get into a back and forth over this. Here's Susan Rice, who's just a political hack, not a national security expert of any worth or insight, just an Obama political hack pretending to be a national security expert that we should listen to, even to this day. Here she is, play 9.
When the Obama administration left office, we left the national strategic stockpile fully stocked, adequately prepared, as one would expect it to be. That has been validated by independent journalists who had the opportunity to visit the stockpile in late 2016. But more than the stockpile, we left this incoming administration with all the tools that we had created for ourselves and that they needed to confront such a pandemic.
So they're going to have a problem here. Again, notice how the narrative shifts with the needs of the left. Oh, Trump didn't prepare adequately. Well, Trump turns around and says, well, they depleted the national stockpile for what the materiel, the ventilators and things we'd need for pandemic response. And they say, no, we had the stockpile full. Okay, well, we'll see about this. But, well, guess what? If that's true, then clearly the national stockpile wasn't enough. And the previous administration didn't do anything about that. But they're going to blame this administration for not knowing it wasn't enough. They're supposed to be the ones who are so smart. And they had all the experts. You know, remember, the same people that think it's intelligent when Obama says to the Coast Guard Academy at their graduation that climate change is the biggest national security threat we face. Okay, national security threat. These people are out of their minds. They think that sounds really intelligent. Oh, and also they're the ones that really understand pandemic disease and were totally prepared for it. Oh, they're the ones, notice how there's a remarkable, and it's just the accident of timing here. Better lucky than good with so much stuff. But when you look at the 3 biggest disasters, and I want to do that with you. I want to look at the timing of the 3 biggest disasters of the last 20 years, how it's affected Democrats, how it's affected Republicans. The 3 biggest crises of the last 20 years, really the 3 big crises of my adult life that we have seen, all have happened to occur in a way. Now, the third one, it still remains to be seen what the political impact of it is. But let's work backwards, shall we? The first time in my adult life that it felt like there was no such thing as real security, and I mean on a global, geopolitical sense. There was no such thing as true security, and that the world can change in a day. That was really one of the world can change in a day, and all of us can be at risk. Was 9/11. We understand this, right? Up to that point in my life, yeah, I remember some stuff when I was a kid about the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I remember the first Persian Gulf War, but the first Persian Gulf War was over in a matter of weeks, and it just, there was never this moment that you had a mass recognition of we are all vulnerable, we are all at risk in some ways. And by the way, that's not to give in to fear or to be scared. That's to accept and to move past, right? We are all at risk. We're all going to die. And I think one aspect of psychology right now that you're seeing is that there are some people who understand that on any given day could in fact be their last. And the state can't prevent that. The state is not able to save you from the prospect of the possibility of death on any given day. And all of us are, in a sense, on borrowed time, which is why spending as much time as you can with loved ones, being as good to people as you can, having as close of a relationship with God, having a fulfilled spiritual life, these are all such important things, more important than bank accounts and promotions and social media acclaim and, looking great on Instagram with perfect abs. I mean, all these other things that people get completely caught up in. We're all going to get old. We're all going to die. Some of us will die before we get old, and that's just life, and that's reality. And those of you listening to this who served in the military overseas, or those of you who are in law enforcement who have taken risks to your life day in and day out, you've had to make that psychological, that psychological, or not make the leap, but you've had to accept that over time. You've had to understand that, right? And at a lesser degree, those of us who served in civilian roles in some of the war zones, I think also accepted that there was a small possibility, but there was a real possibility that you could die. Those mortar rounds would land in those bases. They'd kill anybody. You could be the ultimate fobbit, and some of you know what I'm talking about. The ultimate fobbit, and you're walking to get yet another latte, and you could have, as people that and this happened to people that I know, and they get hit with shrapnel, and that's it. This is the reality, okay? So we all understand that there are threats to us, and we don't constantly fixate on them. 9/11 was a reminder, though, that there are threats that are bigger than just the random and the unexpected accident that can come up, car accidents, things like that. 9/11 changed our perception. The financial crash of 2008, I think, showed us that the financial system that we rely on was much more fragile than we had anticipated. So we had a national security fragility moment of awakening with 9/11. We had an economic fragility awakening in 2008. And now we've had a health and mortality awakening as a result of this pandemic. So those are true across all generations, all political spectrum stuff. Those are just realities. Okay. But then you look at what happened with 9/11, you look at the politics around all of these things for a moment. And I've just got to say, Bill Clinton, the luckiest thing that ever happened to Bill Clinton was that he happened to not be president and had handed the torch over to George W. Bush when 9/11 happened. Because what you had there was, if Bill Clinton, if that had occurred in the last year, let's say, of his presidency, I'm just talking about the timing of 9/11. If that had happened in the last year of his presidency, you would be able to look at this very clear progression of escalating al-Qaeda threats, escalating al-Qaeda attacks, the bombing of the USS Cole in Yemen, the bombing of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. These are those incidents and those embassy bombings, for example, killed hundreds and hundreds of people, wounded a few thousand, if memory serves, when you add the two of them together. And we knew that they were trying for more. We knew that there was an ongoing effort against us. If it had happened on Bill Clinton's watch, the narrative would have been, this guy was too busy doing the stuff that he did in the Oval Office with Monica, too busy lying to the American people, too busy lying under oath, too busy, just doing all that just disgraceful. I mean, that guy polluted the office of the president. That was while he was president. People that try to compare, Donald Trump being a playboy in previous years to his presidency are making a huge error, a category error by comparing two things that are not the same. We're not talking about what Bill Clinton did, back in the wild old 60s or the 70s or something. We're talking about what he did while president, okay? And you'd be able to draw this very straight line between the ineptitude and also things like the response that he had when the grand jury was called and witnesses in the Monica Lewinsky situation were called forward. And that morning he bombed the pharmaceutical factory in Sudan, which in retrospect, all the analysis that I've seen says that, yeah, they were making aspirin. It was not a chemical weapons facility, right? So that was a big wag the dog moment for a lot of people. And Bill Clinton wouldn't be able to escape. His legacy would be that this guy was doing, naughty things in the Oval Office and lying about it under oath. And then we got crushed with a huge terrorist attack. If that had happened on his watch, people wouldn't have trusted Democrats again with national security for 20 years. But, the accidents of history or the capriciousness of timing of these kinds of events, it happened in the first year, the first, 9 months of the Bush presidency. And then you look at the financial crisis. And look, people will argue, this is fine. This is the kind of argument, and people will have this forever. But I think when you look at this, honestly, there's no way that Bush in 9 months was going to be able to do anything to stop al-Qaeda from hitting us the way that they did, given the growth of al-Qaeda infrastructure, the safe haven in Afghanistan. Nobody presented Bush with the opportunity, not that we know of, to take out bin Laden when they had him. They could have done it. And, so there was no realistic way that Bush was going to be able to avert the coming storm. But it was handed over to him, and he got hit with that. And then we had the Iraq and Afghanistan situations. And anyway, that's a whole other conversation. The 2008 financial collapse. The story that you've been told about that, the story that you've been told about it from the media and from pop culture in particular, is Wall Street got greedy and Main Street got hurt. There is truth to that, right? And just with all propaganda, with all partisan narratives, you need there to be some truth, but it's never the whole truth, is it? The truth that they don't tell you is that there were moves made, particularly under the Clinton administration, to just remove lending standards. Everyone gets a house. Doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter what your credit score is. And in particular, if you are in an underserved community when it comes to lending, this was true of certain minority communities in the United States, no lending standards were allowed to apply, and the Department of Justice under the Clinton administration would sue a bank, would sue you, unless you gave loans to people that, in any reasonable, rational world, looking at the modeling, looking at the numbers, these people aren't going to be able to service these loans. Didn't matter. Backstopped by the federal government. That was the policy, and that goes back to the 90s. Everybody who wants a home should get a home. Homes are big. Homes are expensive. Homes are, market-based items. And then we saw that Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac were backstopping those loans, and that meant that there was no risk. So then Wall Street says, well, if they can't fail and we can make money on creating these loans, let's make as many of these loans as possible. And then let's securitize them beyond that. Let's bundle them all together and start selling them, and we'll sell credit default swaps on them because there's no risk because the federal government's backstopping them with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And then kaboom. When does the kaboom happen? Doesn't happen in the first 6 months of the Obama administration, right? The kaboom happens at the end of 8 years of Bush and the war on terror, and you get John McCain, put aside whether he was a good candidate or not, running around trying to hold up the Republican standard, and Obama coming in and being like, see what these guys do? Meanwhile, it was decades in the making, and it was really largely Democrat policy, government intrusion into the market, and those distortions, but it led to, people forget this, Obama was the most left-wing United States senator at the time, with the exception of Bernie Sanders. Okay, Obama was a far left United States senator when he got elected to be president of the United States. That's clearly, at some level, there was a response to, Republicans, they had this disaster. And now we have Trump. Here we go. He's not even at the end of his. And this is another disaster that has been at least a decade, really 20 years in the making. But it happened on a Republican's. You're seeing the pattern here. It has a long-standing issue happens on a Republican's watch. 9/11 on Bush's watch. And then again at the end of Bush's watch, we have the financial crisis of 2008. And now we have this issue of the pandemic. And these issues are changing the trajectory of American politics, and with it, the history of the world. And I don't really have an answer for you in this other than it just seems so unfair. Because any honest, the same way the Democrats claimed that the great economy was the Obama economy and it was just laughable, we all knew it wasn't Obama decisions that led to the first 3 years of the Trump presidency having fantastic numbers, prosperity, low unemployment, and all the rest of it. If you're honest, you know that, but they kept saying it otherwise. I mean, the pandemic that Trump has faced, this is a once-in-a-century situation. Nobody knew this was coming. Nobody understood what the full ramifications were, and nobody really knows how to get us out of it entirely right now. And once again, it has happened on a Republican's watch. So this is tough. This is very difficult. I know we just have to adapt and deal with it, but I think that we should at least be willing to take a step back and say, wow, Democrats, you think about how Clinton was unbelievably derelict in dealing with in a lot of things, but in dealing with Al-Qaeda and in the way that they were doing all this financial engineering as really a means of achieving social justice, and how that set the fuse for the bomb that blew up during the end of the Bush administration with finance. So Bush gets hit with 9/11. And look, Iraq is Bush's fault, not Clinton's fault. So I'm not saying that everything is the Democrats' fault. That's crazy. But Bush gets hit with 9/11, and Bush gets hit with a financial crisis, and both of those things were really very much traceable to the actions or inactions of the 8 years of the Clinton administration before him. And now we got Trump dealing with this once-in-a-century pandemic. Look, the good news is Republicans are the adults in the room, but the bad news is the adults are the ones that have to deal with the really big problems.
Well, I think this is the fundamental point here is that the best person to revive the Donald Trump economy is Donald Trump. And with him in the lead, working with the governors, working on that health and economic guidance, and now working with so many leaders in the private sector who will come forth and share their best practices, talk about what they may want to do in their places of work. And I would say to everyone, take a look at what was put out a week ago. The CDC and the White House put out updated guidance for critical infrastructure workers. That covered about 16 different types of work.
Trump is the best man to get the Trump economy restarted. Certainly hope that's going to end up being a true statement. I know Kellyanne Conway believes it, but this is going to be tough. One problem that I'm seeing is that there's a very little willingness. Economists tend not to be the most aggressive, robust, alpha types. I'm not saying all of them, but generally speaking, people that are economists as a profession, they're not guys that, they're not crushing beer cans on their heads and giving the nerds wedgies. They tend to be the ones getting the wedgies. Right? I think we could all pretty much agree on that. And I think that there's a surprising or rather a noteworthy lack of economists who are doing the modeling to show us, okay, what if we extend this thing to June? You've already had the governor of Connecticut say end of May, essentially. What if we extend the lockdowns in most large population states? What if we extend them to June? What does that look like for unemployment? What does that look like for not just the unemployment number in June? What does it mean the economy looks like next September? What does it mean for the wealth of the average American household? How far in debt will they be? How many businesses will go under? How many of those businesses will be able to come back? There are so many areas where I'm seeing, you would think there should be all this analysis. There should be all these people that usually tell us they've got all the answers, right? Economists love to say, do this or else. My model will show you this, and they're wrong all the time. Where are the economists willing to be wrong right now on an issue where it shouldn't be that hard to be right? We know that the economy is in very bad shape. How bad can this thing get if we keep doing this? Shouldn't we know that? I mean, just think of it this way. We've seen the modeling on the disease, the spread of the disease, the number of fatalities. Where are the models showing us how much, why isn't it circulating widely right now? What does it mean if we stay at this level of economic productivity, give or take, until June? And what about until September? I haven't seen, and I'm asking, I keep saying, someone please send me these. I'm asking for it on Twitter. In more ways than one these days. If you see it, you ask any questions, you just want grandma to die, and all these people freak out at you. I really don't. I don't want anyone to die. But I also don't want the American economy to die, because that means people will die too. That means there'll be death and despair on a level that will last years, and that will have generational effects. People forget this, but when you're talking about alcoholism, drug abuse, child abuse, that replicates itself. That lasts for decades. That lasts into the next generation. And, there are cycles here that can be worsened by things like are worsened by things like an economic crisis that have long-standing effects. But no one's showing me these models. No one seems to want to tackle that, because I think they recognize when you just want to tell people, hey, here's what we're facing. We have a big choice as a nation. Here's what we're looking at with the economy. If you don't just say lockdown, whatever the medical experts say, you get annihilated on social media and people start sending you death threats. That's not the way this should be.